No, I don't think anybody out there would say that, even in the terrible way that Oklahoma was in the last couple of weeks. Craig, what is, at least early on, I mean, we're at the halfway point, what feels different about this team compared to the last few years?
Well, I think it's two different things, Paul. One, certainly folks like to talk about, the culture and the chemistry and all of those kinds of intrinsic things that those of us who aren't in the locker room every day with them don't get a chance to see develop over time, but you see it ultimately manifest itself on the field. That's one thing. But then the other thing is there are some definite schematic and talent things that have improved. And, one area, just for example, would be the tight end position, because they have been tremendous at the tight end spot with Jatavian Sanders and also Gunnar Helm, and they're about to get Jaleel Billingsley back, the Alabama transfer. So they've been really good. And Sark has said from the start that other than quarterback, he thinks that perhaps the most important position on the offense, or at least it can be, is tight end. And they've used the tight end position very, very well here early on the offense. And then on the defensive side, the defensive line is playing really well. Going into the season, the two big question marks would be, how would a very young offensive line, starting two true freshmen, how would they perform, and how would the defensive line, especially the interior line, which did not have a good season last year, perform? And both have played above their level, and that's been encouraging to see.
Obviously, Craig, there was a lot of buzz about Quinn Ewers making the move to Austin when he did, and then there's a lot of build-up to finally being able to see him. Unfortunately, after a big splash against Alabama, that was cut short, but there he was in Dallas and making his mark very quickly and very loudly. I don't want to get into this early all-time conversations and things like that, because his career has a long way to go, but can you try and describe, given all the great players you've seen over the years, just the type of talk and impact and showing you've seen from Quinn Ewers already?
Well, he's got a great calm about him. He's a very low-key guy, but he's a guy that the players on the rest of the team gravitate to. They really like him an awful lot, and I think he has stepped up an awful lot in terms of the team bonding and the team building and all of that sort of stuff. So they really like Quinn, and then obviously, as coaches like to say, he can make all the throws, so that helps, and he makes a lot of those throws.
Craig, Paul kind of brought this up, and you did as well, about inside the locker room. When, that's kind of the joke about when they beat Notre Dame and what was said by a broadcaster about Texas football when they beat Notre Dame with Charlie Strong, and then, of course, after the Sugar Bowl with Sam Ehlinger and what he said. Texas fans get tired of hearing that themselves as much as the country does?
Yeah, I think so, Smokey. I think it got overblown, clearly. I mean, it started with Joe Tessitore with the Texas is back thing. Sam, I think, meant it a little bit differently than how some folks might have interpreted it when he stood on that stage of the Sugar Bowl. But he was flushed with the success of them beating Georgia, and he was asked the question, and so then that's when he said that they were back. So it's been used as a punchline, clearly, the past couple of years, and understandably so. The whole thing about back, and one thing that Sark has said is he's never understood the thing about being back. What exactly does it mean? Does it mean contending for a conference title, a national title? I mean, they've never been in the college football playoff, so there's different layers and levels of what being back is supposed to be all about. And I think that's they're pretty quick to quell any of that stuff when folks bring up that phrase, because, like I said, it had become a punchline with them, and that's one other thing I think that's been impressive about them to this point is that they've largely put their heads down and gone to work, even when they didn't play well. From late third quarter of the game in Lubbock in Texas Tech throughout that fourth quarter, when the defense had to stay on the field and defend 100 plays, and eventually they wore down, and Tech converted 6 out of 8 fourth downs, and that'll wear down any defense over time. And Tech played really well that day, and Texas had the game under control and let it get away. But they went back to work after that and got ready and played well against West Virginia, and then I think they played even better against Oklahoma. We'll see if they can sustain that. And that's one thing at practice this morning. Sark was, I don't know if admonishing is the right word, but he was definitely cautioning very firmly with this team about, that old thing about poison cheese and getting too caught up in the pats on the back when they have to go back to work and get ready for an Iowa State team that, while has been frustrated on its offensive side, plays as good a defense as anybody in the Big 12.
Craig, is that Sark's biggest challenge, is keeping a bubble on that? I've talked to a couple, ex-players, guys who were on that 05 team, over the last couple of years, and they said that the vibe they got, especially as members of that team, was that these new guys don't understand the work that it took to get to that point. And there were a lot of guys that came in and thought when they crossed through the threshold of the 40 acres, some sort of magic amulet came down on them and they were superstars. But the team that won that in 05 worked really, really hard to get it.
They really did. And I think this group has done a better job of understanding it, Paul. They might not have understood it when they came in. And part of that was, especially for some sophomores and juniors who had to learn it the hard way when they first came into the program prior to the pandemic, there was so much that was out of whack. Now, anybody that looks at it numerically can say the Texas program never had a losing season under Tom Herman, went to a bowl game every year, won every bowl game, but there was always something missing, that there could have been something more, that there was more there, more meat left on the bone that could have been accomplished. And so when they made the change, one thing Sark is trying to do is make sure these guys leave everything on the field, both we say it as a phrase, but also meaning that they work very, very hard during the week. And listen, the week leading up to the Alabama game and the week leading up to the Oklahoma game, Sark has thought were his team's two best practice weeks of the season. Now he's trying to get them to make sure that they continue to have that effort on the practice field every week, because if they do, then they've got a good shot to be in just about every game they play the rest of the way, even though they've got a really tough backloaded schedule and conference play down the stretch.
Obviously, Texas had to get better on defense. The coordinator with high marks before he came to Austin. There were struggles last year. And then Gary Patterson entered the picture as an analyst. How much of an impact, Craig, has he had?
I think he's had some, but he has, to hear him talk about it and to hear PK talk about it, and especially Sark, they talk about that effort thing. And, but I think he's helped somewhat with what they're doing schematically, but it was also, I think, a matter of getting guys to understand what was expected of them more, and that gets back to that grind thing. I will tell you this. I ran into him very early, Coach Patterson, very early, right? In fact, it was before it was officially announced. But the hire had been made, and I ran into him in a grocery store, and we were chatting for several minutes, and it was the most relaxed I've ever seen him. And I'd interviewed him several times, and I do a panel discussion at the high school coaching convention with all the Division I college coaches in the state. So I'd gotten to know Gary over the years, but he always seemed a little tightly wound, even in those scenarios. Not when I saw him this time. He's truly enjoying what he's doing, and said he just really loves it. And so because of all of that, I think it's made a big difference as to what his contributions can be for the football team, and they benefited from that as a result of that.
Yeah, Craig, and at this point in his life, look, he could still be a head coach somewhere if he threw his hat in the ring, I'm sure, but maybe, getting to go play his guitar at a bar in Austin and kick back and watch some film and not be the guy who has to make all the decisions is what he needs.
That's one of the things he talked about what he really, really likes is, he said to me, I don't have to worry about a lot of those ancillary things of being a coach. He said, and he was like bubbling over with the fact that he'd just been in the film room going over cut-ups for several hours. But he likes that stuff. He's like a lot of coaches, they love diving into film. Sark's the same way. Loves looking at plays. He spends time in the offseason. He spent, I think, 3 weeks around Sean McVay of the Rams, also the new coach of the Dolphins, and also the head coach of the Packers. And because they're all like-minded guys in terms of how they dive into a lot of the offensive theories of what they can do. I mean, coaches, you know, as you guys know, because you've been around enough of them, that they love coaching, and they love theory, they love diving into the playbook and figuring out new ways to build the mousetrap. And I think Patterson's one of those guys, and I know Sark is one of those guys.
Craig, one of the problems has been in the past, they win a big game or they play really well, and then they kind of have that, my God, here we go again. The focus this week on taking care of Iowa State, there is, and they've had success against Texas, there is no full of themselves feel. Do you get that at all this week?
Yeah, I do, because they know that they've got to grind. They know they've got to be better. And you're right. Iowa State's won 3 in a row against Texas. So and I'm sure Sark is reminding them of that at every turn. So there's a lot they have to do to get ready for this. And I think we're seeing that this week. And I think that they'll be ready come game day on Saturday morning. Should be a lot of fun.
Hey, Craig, thank you, man. Appreciate your time as always. Great stuff with what you do and how you juggle the high school stuff, which is excellent, with what you do with Texas and much more as well. That's Craig Way, voice of the University of Texas and really the voice of high school football in the state of Texas.